Welcome to episode 19 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I interview one of ScreenCraft.org's founders, John Rhodes. John worked in development for many years, and we discuss some of the films that he worked on during his career, including Drive, The Gray, and Ender's Game. There are some great lessons to learn from hearing how these projects were developed, so stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes. These iTunes reviews really are important to me. First, I really like reading what people have to say about the podcast. I've had a lot of really good suggestions come through the comment section of YouTube and iTunes, so thank you for all of those. But the iTunes reviews help to improve my rankings within iTunes. The more reviews I receive, the higher up I seem to go in their search results. So if you have a minute, and you find this podcast valuable, please do leave me a comment on iTunes. I'd also like to thank Ginger Shine and Maria Carrasco for leaving me some very nice comments over on YouTube for episode 17. So thank you for those comments. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell Your Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. A quick few words about what I'm working on. As I mentioned over the last few episodes, I did a blast for my limited location horror thriller screenplay. And so now I'm fielding the replies. I've had a few people like the script, but so far no one is in a position to actually option and produce the film. But sometimes these things take months, so I'm still very hopeful. I've mentioned this too on the podcast. I've talked recently with a bunch of producers who are looking for limited location sci-fi thrillers. So I've begun to write a sci-fi thriller spec script. Again, I'm going to keep it so that it's fairly simple, fairly contained, so it will be easy to shoot. I've got it all outlined, and I actually started writing pages for it in the last couple of days. So this seems to be something I'm hearing quite a bit from producers. So I think there will be producers eager to have a look at this once I'm done. So now let's get into the main segment. Today, I'm interviewing John Rhodes. He's one of the founders of ScreenCraft.org, which runs a bunch of screenwriting competitions and also offers development services to screenwriters. John worked in development at several production companies, and we talk about some of the projects he worked on, including Drive, The Gray, and Ender's Game. Here's the interview. Welcome, John, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Great. Thank you for having me, Ashley.
So to start out, I wonder if you can give us a quick overview of your career in the entertainment industry, just how you got started and how you ended up where you are today.
Well, I started out, as many do, as an unpaid intern. I started as an intern at a company called Odd Lot Entertainment, and that's a private production company and financier. And as an intern, I read a screenplay there called Drive and got to see that film from script to screen through the development process and production process, which was a great learning experience and kind of introduction for me into the entertainment industry. We went on to do a film called Ender's Game, which is an adaptation of a science fiction novel. And then I went over to be assistant to the CEO of a film distributor, Open Road Films, which is a co-venture of AMC and Regal, the two largest theater chains in the country. And that was a really great experience. I feel grateful for everything that I learned there. I was also acquisitions coordinator, helping choose films to distribute to a wide audience in theaters across the country. And seeing that side of the business was very eye-opening, because that's really where the rubber meets the road, where tickets, are sold, butts are in seats, and films reach their audience. So seeing that part of the business gave me a lot of insight into what kind of film, like why a film gets made, really understanding the economic realities of what goes into greenlighting a film. I then worked for Media Talent Group, which is a management company. Our clients were Angelina Jolie, Nicole Kidman, Billy Bob Thornton, Amber Heard, and was there for a little less than a year before I left to start my own screenplay development consultancy, ScreenCraft.org. So that's my arc so far in this town. I've been here just under 5 years, and it's been a really great ride so far.
Perfect. So I think that sums it up. I want to dig in a little bit to a couple of the actual films that you've helped to develop. Let's start with Drive, since you mentioned that one right there. Maybe walk us through the very early process. I think there's a lot of screenwriters that might be wondering, hey, I've got a script. How can I get my script to a company that will develop it, get talent attached, get a director attached? How did you discover that script? And just walk us through sort of the process, really as far back as you can take us in that process.
Okay. Well, so I was an intern when that came through, and that's, I guess, a pretty good place to start, because a lot of these screenplays, they're discovered. Drive was written by Hossein Amini, who's he's a produced screenwriter with some real credits under his belt and some Hollywood credibility. So, he has an agent and a manager, and he adapted Drive, which was a novella, a short novel. And that screenplay, it was great. I mean, that's really where it starts. It was a really good screenplay. There's a few elements here that I think point to some trends in Hollywood now. One, it was based on a published novel, and executives greenlighting films are much more confident to greenlight something that's based on some other intellectual property these days. We see that trend all over the place now of adaptations and sequels. So that was one element. The way the project came together.
I wonder if I could just cut in there. So did he adapt it? Did he take the initiative and read the book, option it from the original author, and then write it on spec, or did a producer hire him to write that original script based on the novel? And then in that case, the producer probably would have optioned the source material.
Yeah, my guess is the latter, but I really don't know. That's a great question, and I want to dig into that actually. My guess is probably the latter. Especially a writer like Hossein Amini, who has a few major credits under his belt. He's probably not going out and optioning projects on his own and writing them on spec. I have a feeling, his agent or manager connected him with a producer who wanted to adapt that novel.
Mm-hmm. The other point that I would like to make about that is how popular was the novel of Drive? I get a lot of screenwriters emailing me saying, I've just self-published my novel and I know Hollywood wants to, adapt stuff. And a self-published novel that has no real success behind it is not necessarily giving you a leg up on something. So I have not heard of the novel Drive. I've not heard of the novel Drive before the movie came out. I don't read a lot of fiction novels, so perhaps I wouldn't have heard of it. But how successful was the novel Drive? Yeah,
good question. It really wasn't. It wasn't a blockbuster. I mean, it's a novelette. It's this tiny. I think it's like a 60 or 70 page little book, and it didn't have a big fan base, but James Salas, the writer, does have a big fan base, and he's a very established author with quite a wide body of work. And I think ultimately, yes, producers want to find something that has a little bit of a built-in audience, or at least a really, even if it's a small audience, a passionate audience that loves the material. That, can only help you. It's kind of a double-edged sword, though. I get that question a lot too. Writers ask me, should I self-publish, my story as a novel and then adapt it to a screenplay, because that's what people are buying these days, and that can sometimes hurt you more than it can help, because without a publisher behind you, and unless it gains a real audience and readership, sometimes it'll make the project look smaller. If you just have a published book with 3 Amazon reviews, something like that, that won't necessarily help you. Yeah.
So let's jump back into that. So you guys as a production company, or I should say, he's got the script written, and then sort of how did he get it to your production company?
Yeah. So the writer, it was actually Mark Platt who has a Universal producing deal, had the project, and Ryan Gosling loved it. So Ryan Gosling was attached from the get-go when Mark Platt, the producer, had it. And Mark asked Ryan who he wanted to direct it, and Ryan chose Nick Refn, the Danish director. So that was a kind of a package deal that came to us. It came to us through WME, William Morris agency, and that came, and it actually came through our relationship with Bold Films. So that's an interesting trend in the industry now too, is you'll see these little alliances of production companies and foreign sales companies get together and kind of form a mini studio ecosystem that can have the equity, the foreign pre-sales, and then ally themselves with a studio producer. So that's really how that came to be. It came from our one of the packaging agents at WME. They gave it to me as an intern to cover it. That's what happens a lot in these production companies is, they'll have assistants and interns reading all this material, dozens of scripts a week, oftentimes packaged with talent attached. And if it gets a favorable coverage, it gets kind of bumped up the ladder to the creative executive and then to the director of development and then to, the EVP of development whose job it is to essentially greenlight these films and bring it to the financier and say, hey, I really want to champion this as a project that I think will be successful for us. So
when
that's what
as an intern, when you're reading this script, how much of these sort of additional elements are you aware of? Like in this case, Ryan Gosling was attached. Mm-hmm. The director. You also mentioned that there's some sales, some international sales sort of built into this, a production company. How much of that are you aware of as an intern reading this script, as sort of the first one reading the script?
Yeah.
And how much does that color your sort of
a lot
decision?
A lot. I mean, ultimately, a screenplay needs to be great on its own. But the biggest thing I learned on Drive is how much a director's vision brings to a script and how much it transforms what's on the page into a real, cinematic experience. And that's huge because in the hands of any other director, Drive would have been a very different film. So yeah, all those elements are part of the package. You have the script and usually a printed out email with a brief summary of the script's attachments. So in this case, it was Nick Refn, the director, Mark Platt, the producer, and Ryan Gosling, the star, and that was it. And so we, as a financier and foreign sales company, were evaluating, the market potential and also the creative, quality of the project. So I read it. I knew, Ryan Gosling's body of work. I didn't really know Nick Refn, so I watched Nick Refn's Bronson that night, because I really wanted to impress my boss and show him that I was, taking this consideration very seriously and doing my due diligence and research. And I was really blown away with Nick Refn's work. He did this film called Bronson, which is just so visceral and powerful, but also poetic and visually stunning and great soundtrack. And I was just really, I saw that he was a director with a real auteur vision, and I thought, wow, he could take a fairly commercial screenplay like Drive, which has just a great opening sequence. Even if you read it, it's so engaging. It's Driver evading the police and listening to the basketball game and timing it so that when the game gets out, he can blend into the crowd. And that happens all within the first 10 pages, and I was hooked when I was reading it. You consider all those elements, and the more you know, I think the better judgment you can make.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there was, during your time at this, as an intern reading the sort of the first level of reader, did you come across projects where they had some really significant attachments, but you read the script and you were like, oh my God, this is just absolutely god-awful? Was there that sort of thing, or even just lukewarm, like, gee, this is not great, but it has all these great attachments?
Absolutely. And it's tough, especially if it's a director that you really admire and love, but you read the script and you're just not impressed. It is tough. Yeah, certainly. I mean, some major scripts came through. Some we passed on that we probably wished we hadn't, and some we passed on and we're glad we did. And
exactly.
Yeah, like for instance, I read a script, it was called Our Idiot Brother. Starring, and Paul Rudd was attached, and it had, I think, some money attached to it, and maybe some other stars. I think Rashida Jones was attached at the time. Anyway, I really liked it, and I recommended that we do it, but I passed it up, and my boss ultimately didn't like it and passed on it, and glad we did, because it did really poorly at the box office.
Yeah.
And that's just a small example in my young career of seeing a project that I really loved on the page, but the movie ultimately just was not a commercial success. And, who knows? There's so many elements that go into a successful movie, from the screenplay to the directing to the acting to the marketing, which is incredibly important for selling tickets. And a movie's performance opening weekend dictates its value over the whole life of the film in a huge way. That's the one thing I learned working in distribution.
Okay, well, let's go on and talk about The Gray. That was a film you and I talked about over lunch a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, it was a film that I had never heard of. At some point, it popped up on Netflix On Demand, and I actually just checked. At least, as of today, April 30th, 2014, it's still available on Netflix On Demand. So it was not something that was on my radar until I saw it on Demand. But I thought it was a really good film, and one, as I said, that kind of was below the radar in a lot of grades. So maybe walk us through that project.
Sure. Yeah. So on that project, I was working in acquisitions at a domestic film distributor. And what distributors do is they buy finished films or films, that are in production, and they buy the exclusive right to distribute those films over a given period. It's usually 10 or 20 years. And so then there's different distribution windows. You do your theatrical release, which is theaters, and that's in theaters for, let's say, 5-6 weeks, sometimes less. And then it moves to the, Blu-ray and DVD market, and then you move into your premium cable and pay TV, and then free TV, and then subscription video on demand, which is like Netflix. And so we came on board and acquired that. So I wasn't really a part of the development per se, although it was in production when we acquired it, and we did have a little bit of notes on the ending in the edit to change how it ends a little bit. And the ending is a little different than it is in the script. But so I read the script to evaluate the movie because it was in production and we couldn't screen it yet. And it was a fantastic script. And Joe Carnahan, I mean, just what a strong director, and what a personality. It was a pleasure getting to know him and seeing that whole process in production and kind of seeing the daily footage and then seeing how it came together in the edit. But we evaluated that purely on its commercial potential. Open Road Films, prides itself in releasing great films, but their number one concern is to make money for, their shareholders. They're owned by, the two largest theater chains in the country, and they need to find movies that will make money ultimately. So the whole deal with that was figuring out what was the right price for us to pay for that movie and what was the right deal that we could negotiate that would, make the distributor some money. And that all hinged on Liam Neeson ultimately. Joe Carnahan it really helped. He's a great director, but he might not be at the level of, a top director who could on his own name, sell a film.
One thing you mentioned to me, as I said, when we talked about this film before, was the actual meeting with Joe Carnahan. I actually saw him speak when his first movie, Blood, Bullets, Octane, and came out. It was an IFP screening, independent film screening, and he was actually there. And I remember I watched the movie. I thought, it was not a great movie. But then he came on and talked, and like you, I was just really impressed with him as a person. And he just is a larger than life character. And I often wonder, how much that impacts one's career. Just being able to get in a room, and I mean, he's one of these guys. He just is full of energy and very personable, and always has a witty remark. And I wonder how much that has been able to sort of, as I said, keep his career going, as opposed to just his raw directing talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a people business, and the people who are good in a room and can sell their project with passion and vision. I mean, those are the people that get attention. And there's no doubt that he is a larger than life character, and he really, there's a lot of stories about him too. But great. And his brother is Matthew Michael Carnahan. So he comes, kind of from an entertainment family. They're both working in the business. His brother is the writer behind World War Z and State of Play and The Kingdom. So they have it. And also his sister actually is a development executive as well. So I got to meet the whole family as that was in production. But the big takeaway that I got from The Gray is how important an A-list star is to getting a movie made. Because without Liam Neeson, the film would have been really hard to market. What was interesting, if you haven't seen the film, it's actually kind of a slow, meditative, existential man versus nature drama set, in the Arctic wilderness. But we marketed it because we needed to sell tickets and have a meaningful opening weekend box office. We marketed it as a very down-the-middle action movie with Liam Neeson, punching wolves and, planes crashing. And they selected all of the most high-caliber action footage from the movie to pack into one trailer to really sell it as an action movie. But it's not. It's really not. Yeah. So it was intentionally, in a sense, it was intentionally mismarketed to sell tickets. And in video now, it's found a different audience, I think, maybe a slightly higher brow audience who really finds Joe's artistic vision in it really appealing. But anyway, Liam Neeson was essential to getting that movie made because he is a big star, especially after Taken. He's emerged as this kind of unlikely aging action star. And he definitely, his face, was front and center on the poster, and he was able to also, sell that movie foreign, which selling foreign means you sell the rights for the movie to be distributed in different countries, and oftentimes foreign sales really hinge upon an A-list star as well, because that's what sells a movie.
Sure. So let's talk a bit about Ender's Game. That's obviously something that came out fairly recently. And just maybe walk us through the process, your part of the process of that film.
Yeah, Ender's Game is a sci-fi adventure epic based on a novel by Orson Scott Card, which was published in the 80s and has since become, a real cult favorite. It's taught in some schools. I read it, when I was in middle school, and what a great story. It's, about a young boy who's a genius, and the fate of the world is on his shoulders, and he's trained as a military genius to lead this epic army of human beings against this alien threat, and it's set in the far future when we have interplanetary travel, and so that film was in development for a long time. It was at multiple studios, I believe Warner Brothers and Fox, I believe, and it just it went through different iterations, and it proved really difficult to develop. One, because it's a very interior journey about a young boy's psychology. It has child actors too, which every producer shies away from child actors because they're expensive for one. You have less hours that you can work them, and they have to have their parents with them. And it's also, hard to sell a movie with child actors because there's not many famous child actors. They all grow up too quick. They don't stay children very long. So we overcame all those difficulties, though, found a fantastic creative visionary in Gavin Hood, who was the writer and director. He took, the screenplay was through probably 4 or 5 different writers, but we took it and started over. The screenplay was in turnaround. When a script is in turnaround, it means that a studio has invested money into developing it, but ultimately decided that they're not going to produce it. But they have, maybe a couple $100,000 worth of money invested into different drafts of the screenplay and optioning the underlying intellectual property. And so for it to, revert to another studio, for someone else to take over the project, they have to basically buy it out. So we had to, buy it out for, X $100,000 because it had already had a lot of investment into it. So anyway, started over, had Gavin Hood do a draft, and so I was part of the writing, process. I was collating notes from different drafts. I was scheduling the meetings, as assistant to the producer. I was sitting down with Gavin and putting together these visual presentations to then that he was taking to pitch to investors and visual effects houses, and it was a really cool process to work with someone of that caliber. Gavin was an interesting choice because his film Tsotsi, it's an Academy Award-winning foreign film, from he's South African, was a very small drama about a boy. But then Gavin also went on to do Wolverine, which is a massive tentpole, superhero movie for Fox. And so we really saw in him having maybe both the strengths, being able to do a small drama with children and being able to do a tentpole, big budget blockbuster. So, and he leveraged, I think, both those skills into Ender's Game, and it's a good film. It had a solid response. It has its critics and it has its fans. But ultimately, Gavin calls it probably the biggest independent film ever made because it was truly independent and it had a close to $100 million budget.
Huh! Wow. So at the beginning, you talked about working for a distributor and kind of getting some idea about why scripts ultimately get made. I wonder if you can give us some tips. And I know that there's a lot of writers out there that are not in a position to get Liam Neeson attached to their screenplay. Obviously, if you can, that's great for you. But I wonder if there's some sort of more down to earth tips that you could give us from your perspective to writers who are, maybe they've written a few scripts, maybe they've optioned a few things, maybe they have an agent or a manager, but they're definitely on sort of let's say the first third of their career. Yeah,
good question. I mean, like getting A-list talent attached to your screenplay, if you're a writer, who isn't, in the middle of the business, is next to impossible. Ultimately, though, the script needs to go through the proper channels, and those channels are through an agent, or usually through a manager first, and then to an agent, and then out to talent. Oftentimes, talent won't consider a screenplay or even read it unless there's a cash offer on the table. So, most screenwriters can't make a multi-million-dollar cash offer themselves, so they need to have the screenplay optioned by a producer. And producers, where do they get screenplays? From all different sources, but mainly through agents and managers. Who are the ones developing and then pitching the material around town. And there's thousands of screenplays that get considered and passed on, every week in this town. And going through the right channels is really the best way to do it. There's a pretty sophisticated machinery out here for processing creative material. And getting it into those channels isn't always easy, but once it's in, it has a fair shot at being considered by the big players in town.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for myself, and you can, I'd be curious to hear because you've worked for production companies and for myself, I've had a couple agents, had a couple managers, but they've never been real good at getting my stuff out there. And I've had a fair amount of success going directly to producers, basically skipping the agent and manager thing. Now, with that said, I have not had I don't typically get to the companies that have big, as you mentioned, deals with Universal or something like that. They're more independent producers, and those producers are more likely to they're likely to be more open to newer writers and to writers without representation and stuff.
Well, and actually, that's a good point, because there are very different levels of production in this town. There are small indie projects that aren't looking for A-list talent. And there's made-for-TV movies, and there's made-for-home video movies. And so there's a whole level of different size, different scaled productions. Oftentimes, people ask me, hey, does my script have a shot at getting made? And I always say, look, there's an audience for every single script out there. There's an audience for every single movie. Sometimes that's an audience of one. You might be the only person that really understands and likes your story. Probably not, though. There's probably some like-minded people out there. The broader you get with your story, the wider appeal that it has, the bigger budget that it could potentially command. So the question isn't, look, can my movie get made? The question is, at what scale can it get made, And that really, the economics dictate, what gets made. And oftentimes that's just comparing it to other films. That's exactly the reason why people always ask, why is Hollywood making the same movies over and over again? Well, because it's a proven market and it's a lower risk to make those movies. And when you're putting millions of dollars, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, into a movie, you better be damn sure you're going to see most of that money back. And it's a pretty serious decision.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. It is just a matter of figuring out what scale, because in this day and age you can get your iPhone and you can just shoot your movie on your iPhone for no dollar. So can your movie get made? The question is just how much persistence and how hard you want to work getting it made. Whether it makes money is perhaps a different story, but anything can get made in this day and age.
Exactly, and anything is getting made. Which is why distributors have a pretty interesting role in the business now, because they can sit back and basically screen all of the content that's being produced and kind of cherry pick the projects that they believe have the most commercial potential. And they're not taking much of the risk. I mean, they are putting up risk in terms of marketing dollars, which, by the way, can be very expensive. Most movies spend almost sometimes more than their budget in marketing dollars. The Gray, that was just a roughly $20 million film, and we spent over $20 million marketing it. Because that's what it takes. You got to get trailers in theaters, you have to get TV spots, on major TV networks, and you have to, buy billboards across the country. The Gray opened, an interesting, I learned a lot about distribution strategy, and one of the big strategies when you're releasing a film is picking the release date. And that's something I didn't realize, that there's actually a big difference in dates throughout the year of when people go to see movies. And traditionally, January is seen as kind of the dumping ground, when none of the big movies come out in January, because for some reason it's just a really low attendance month in theaters. And I think this is a testament to, my boss, Tom Ortenberg, who's the CEO of Open Road Films. He used to be the president of distribution at Lionsgate, and he really saw an opportunity to open a film in January, a film like The Gray, when there was really nothing else, out there similar to it. And sure enough, it opened the #1 movie that weekend.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what you're working on now, ScreenCraft. Maybe you can just give us sort of your elevator pitch, what it is, what services you offer to screenwriters, and really how best can screenwriters use the services.
Yeah, well, so I started ScreenCraft about a year and a half ago with my business partner Cameron, who was a development assistant at Lionsgate, and he's now a freelance script reader for the Sundance Institute and several major agencies and production companies in town. And he was he interned briefly and was a script reader for us at Open Road Films a few years ago, and I just read his notes, and I've read a lot of coverage from all kinds of readers, from interns to professional, script readers to other assistants, and even to executives' creative notes, and Cameron's were just head and shoulders above anyone's who I'd read. And so I talked to him and I said, look, we should get into screenplay consulting. This is both, a passion that both of us share. and we have a lot of connections in the industry. Let's just see what we can do. So we started ScreenCraft.org and started offering development services for screenwriters. And we offer notes. We also have screenwriting contests. And our mission is to connect good screenplays with, good producers and production companies that we know in town.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about the contest. What different types of contests do you have, and maybe some of the dates, the upcoming, entry dates and that kind of thing?
Sure, yeah. We've got 4 genre-specific contests. And the reason we've gone genre-specific is because we saw a need for that. There's a lot of screenwriting contests out there, some of them reputable, some of them not. And we heard the complaint that, people would enter, some of the major contests and they wouldn't feel like their scripts were getting fair evaluation because maybe they were a raunchy comedy or maybe they were a really edgy and dark horror film. And, let's face it, one of those maybe more genre-specific screenplays isn't going to win the Nichols Fellowship or, Blue Cat or, one of the great, top tier screenwriting competitions. So we thought, let's do some smaller genre specific contests, tailor the judges and the prize packages to that genre and see if that can help people. And so we started with our horror contest. We have a comedy contest and an action thriller contest and a family-friendly contest. So those are our 4 genres that we chose. We chose those because we know that they're specific genres with specific production companies that specialize in those genres, and they have demonstrated commercial potential and a real kind of niche audience that exists out there for all of those genres. So anyway, our horror contest is in its 2nd year. We have had fantastic success lining up some really specific, horror-specific judges. Our judges include Scott Henderson, who's one of the top agents at Paradigm Talent Agency. He represents James Wan and Lee Wanell. James Wan, of course, did Saw and Insidious and The Conjuring. We have Andrew Wilson, who's Clive Barker's manager. We have John Carpenter's manager. We have the senior vice president of development at Blumhouse. Blumhouse is, the company behind Paranormal Activity and The Purge and Sinister. And then we have Lucy Mukherjee, who's the vice president of production at After Dark Films, which is one of the major horror production companies in town. So we really have the top, Hollywood representatives of the genre evaluating these screenplays. Similarly, we have our comedy contest, which is currently accepting entries. Our 2 contests that are open for entries now are horror and comedy. But we have executives from Happy Madison, which is Adam Sandler's company, from Montecito Picture Company, which is the company behind I Love You Man, Up in the Air, Old School, No Strings Attached. We have Mark O'Connor, who's the head of development at Green Hat Films, which did The Hangover and Project X and Due Date. We have Patton Oswalt's manager. We have a development executive from Funny or Die. We have the producer of Napoleon Dynamite. We have a manager at Kaplan Perone and 3 Arts. Ben, who's a staff writer at Nerdist Industries. So we just have a great kind of cross-section of the comedy industry and the top production companies and executives involved in that. That's why we've chosen genre-specific stuff, is we feel like it eliminates some genre bias, and it also allows us to tailor the prize package to the genre of the film.
Perfect. So one of the questions I get quite often from people emailing me is, should I enter contests? And I feel like a lot of people have this idea that, if they can win a contest, their career will be off to the moon. And even the Nicole Fellowship is one of the, most well-regarded contests. You can go through a list of the winners of that from past years, and some of them have made it, but some of them have definitely not made it. So I just wonder, what can someone realistic expect if they win your contest or even one of the other, top tier contests? What can they expect? How can that help their career, and how can they use that sort of to continue on with their forward progress in their screenwriting career?
Well, great question. I mean, I'm a realist, and I have to be very honest, and this might burst some bubbles out there, but the chances of you getting your script made into a film are very, very low. The chances are very low. It's one in hundreds of thousands. There are so many screenplays out here, and it takes so much money to get a movie produced, and it's, at the end of the day, a screenplay is an invitation to collaborate, It's a blueprint for a director to put his vision on it. And there's so many creative minds involved in getting a film made. So it's, the chances of you seeing your movie produced into the movie that you envision are pretty much zero. It's going to transform and take on new life under other creative visions. Unless you are a director and you get the, producer behind you to, give you full execution of your vision, like a Paul Thomas Anderson or one of these auteur directors who really can execute their own vision. Otherwise, it's gonna go and transform and become something probably different than you envision. But that's fine. Look, your words, or at least most of them, made it onto the screen.
Some of them.
Yeah, some of them. Maybe
a few.
Of them. Yeah. So get back to your question, though. What do contests do? Contests are a way to get your screenplay in front of people who are industry professionals and who have, the real decision-making power to get your script made. The chances of it actually getting made, very low, but contests are really a way to, you as a writer, to get exposure. Are there lots of success stories coming out of every single contest? No, because there's just very small percentage of success stories in this industry. A lot of people grinding away at their scripts, and it takes years sometimes. But that said, there are a lot of great success stories. There are film writers who have been discovered through these top contests. Evan Dougherty was discovered through Script Pipeline. There's some great success stories coming out of Blue Cat and Nichols as well. And it's our ambition to generate some very specific success stories through our genre contests. And we've assembled what we believe to be, the top and most influential people in the genres around this contest. So we're a very young company. We've been around for less than 2 years, but we anticipate some really exciting success stories. We have already had some small successes, some writers that we've discovered who have gotten representation and whose projects have been optioned. But we would love nothing more than to see some of our writers go on to get their screenplays to the screen and see some really big stories come out of our contests.
One of the things that, I know, as I mentioned earlier, I've been real aggressive contacting producers, and that's how really I've optioned and sold pretty much everything that I've done. And one of the things that contests are definitely good for is, if you've won something in a prestigious contest, you can mention that in your query letter, and it gives you just a little bit of a credential. And for the money that you spend entering the contest, if you can build up a few credentials, even 1 or 2 semi-final placings in a contest, it's more than a lot of people have. So that's one angle. Just to use some very limited exposure in a contest to still use it to your advantage. The other thing you mentioned earlier in the interview, you mentioned Drive was a book, and I think that's probably maybe on the higher end, but there's a lot of producers that have optioned books, and they might not have a big budget to adapt that book, and I think that's where someone that maybe wins a contest might get exposure to a producer, and there might be some synergy there where, hey, a producer might have some material that's similar to a script that you wrote, and that might be a potential way of sort of breaking in and writing some stuff. A lot of that stuff may be for free. The producer has no budget for the adaptation, so there might be some really hard work involved, but I think that's another thing that contests can just, as you say, just get exposure to these producers that have material that they need written, and they don't have a big budget to necessarily hire an A-list writer.
Absolutely. And, this reminds me of a point that I wanted to make, and that is that oftentimes contests aren't going to get your specific project option, but they will expose you as a screenwriter, as in a unique voice and writer to potentially be hired to do a rewrite of someone's script or to adapt, a novel that they want done. Oftentimes, at least the producers on our contests are wanting to read these writers, to discover writers who they can have as part of, a team of people that they can reach out to with, paid writing gigs. So sometimes the most important thing, and I encounter, a lot of screenwriters who are so fixated on their one project, and they've poured their soul into this one screenplay, and that's a wonderful thing, and that's great, but the most successful writers out here are flexible, and they know that, if you get too hung up on your one passion project, you're going to miss opportunities. And I'm sure, everyone has heard this 1,000 times, but you got to have 4, 5, 10 screenplays under your belt, because if you are lucky enough to get a meeting with a, producer or a top manager, and they like your script, but they don't see real, potential in it, they might ask you what else you have. So you got to have stuff in your back pocket to give them.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, John, you've been very generous. This has been enlightening for me, so I really appreciate your coming on the podcast. I wonder if you can just quickly tell us, if people want to contact you or learn more about your services, what are some of the best ways to contact you? Email, Twitter, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Follow us on Twitter. ScreenCrafting is our handle. We're on Facebook. You can email me, John, John, at ScreenCraft.org, and check out our website, ScreenCraft.org, and we look forward to hearing from you. And thank you, Ashley. It's always great to talk to you.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll link all that stuff to the show notes. So if you're listening to this, you can check out the show notes, and then there'll be direct links to all of the stuff that you just mentioned. So once again, John, I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you, Ashley.
Just a quick plug for my upcoming class, How to Write a Killer First Act for Your Screenplay. I'll be running the online class May 31st at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's all online, so if you have an internet connection or even just a phone line, you can participate. You can actually listen to the audio portion of the call through a normal telephone, so you actually don't even need to be online. Just go to www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/classes to learn more about it. Also, last month's class, I taught on how to write awesome opening pages. The class was recorded, so if you missed it and want to check it out, just go to www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Members of SYS Select get access to all the recorded classes. There are now currently 7 in our class library, as well as all the live online classes like the one on May 31st. So check that out if you're interested. In next week's podcast, I'll be interviewing Gerald LeBaron. Gerald is the founder of Inktip. Inktip is a great way for screenwriters to market their material. It really works, and it's not too expensive either. In the interview, Gerald gives some great marketing tips for screenwriters, so you're not going to want to miss this interview if you're trying to figure out how to best market your scripts. In this episode's writing words section, I just wanted to talk about sort of a bunch of similar emails that I constantly get. I get emails from people asking about the specific services like the Blacklist, like Inktip, like contests, and they all basically go the same way. Should I try Inktip? Should I enter this contest or that contest? Should I try the Blacklist? And one of the things that you're going to find is you've got to get out there and do something. You've got to just start trying stuff and kind of see what works. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I just continue to get these emails, and I'm always kind of curious, kind of why people are sending them in. Because as I said, the main way you're going to move ahead is not by being too cautious. It's by just getting out there and sending stuff in. I mean, there are some costs involved. I mean, certainly like something like the Blacklist is probably on the higher end of cost. I mean, you're basically going to be in it for like $150 to get a script up there for a month or two and get a couple of reviews. But in the scheme of things, when you think about the potential upside, I mean, selling a script, you could potentially make, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So spending some money on these things is really just part of the process. Now, I've mentioned this in the podcasts. If you are lucky enough to be able to move to Los Angeles, I would say, from my experience, talking to screenwriters that are successful, the number one way screenwriters broke in is by getting low-level jobs in the industry, networking, and moving their way up. And that's certainly a good way to do it. And if you're young, you don't have a lot of responsibilities, and you can move to LA, I definitely recommend that you do that. That really is the best way to get going and get your career going. But if you're not in a position to do that, you've got to get out there and try stuff. And the key with marketing, it's not a matter of like hitting the home runs. The key key with marketing is getting out there and trying a bunch of things. Oh, most stuff is going to fail, but that's fine. That's all part of the process, because once something starts to work, you push in that direction and you keep pushing hard in that direction. And that's how things are going to start to click for you. You're going to have a lot of failures, but you only need one success to get things off the ground. Anyways, I hope this episode was valuable. Thank you, and that's it. Bye-bye.